Welcome to Talk OT to Me, the podcast where we get nerdy but stay real about the world of operational technology.
Here we dig into the issues shaping modern manufacturing.
Let's talk OT.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Talk OT to Me. How are you doing, Justin?
I'm doing great. It's great to see you again, back on the other side of the pond, but
Yes.
It's great to see you again this evening.
Yeah. And how is it with the tornadoes in Houston? I was talking to you yesterday, and it was a bit rocky.
It's Texas in the spring, so
Yeah.
every other day changes, but we're all good here. Everybody's safe.
Yeah.
In my
Yeah.
neck of the woods. So.
Yeah. I'm also safe here in Denmark, getting into summer, so starting to rain and be cold again. That's typical Danish summer weather. Yeah.
Nice.
So great to see you again, Justin. Today we are talking about OT supply chain security, and not just about like the initial part of it, because the way we really see it is that it's a chain of trust, and the chain is very long and also very much continuing. When you talk about OT, it's who built it, who installed it, who updated it, who's supporting it, and who can remotely touch it, and who can change when the production is live. And it is this involving chain of, hey, your supply chain in security in OT is often a bit longer, bit more complicated than you see in IT.
For sure.
You have the whole chain of like, okay, the OEM has built the machine, he's installed a PLC, he's probably make updates and changes to that PLC to run it. There's maybe an integrator that actually installed it. There is a software vendor that without having the OEM integrator comes without software updates. You might have another contractor that is then doing maintenance on that PLC, logging into that PLC, opening packages, doing changes, doing the install. And then you have the plant who's sort of inheriting it all and having to understand what goes on. So that the chain for OT is fairly long, and the trust chain needs to be very, very long and very tight.
Yeah, based on that, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and
yes.
and the reality
and then it's good we have run new. Yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and then the reality of it, it's very long, and it's then maintained for 20 years after. So that doesn't at all complicate the stuff that we just we only got to look at it 20 years after. Yeah. Do you have that bill of material, Justin, from 20 years ago on that
right.
PLC out there?
We installed that in the year 2000.
Yes.
Can you tell me what software is running on it? Yeah, it's definitely complicated, sadly, and it's why we're doing this episode. That increases the attack surface dramatically, particularly on the OT side. We'll talk a little IT as well. And it makes it that much more difficult to secure, and then take some of the inherent deficiencies that we continue to see on the OT side of the house, which, by the way, I got some feedback. We should say what OT means. It's not overtime. It means operational technology or industrial control systems. That's what we're talking about here. But inherently, those systems not only are older, but they weren't designed at least 20 years ago, not even 10 years ago, with a security first focus. Whereas on the IT side, 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, security became a significant focus on the IT side. It's changing on the OT side. OT is becoming more security aware, but I'll give you an example. Visibility is still quite poor on the OT side. As you know, I used to work for a Department of Defense contractor, and I had a buddy. He and I were talking about some things that we'd seen, sharing war stories. And he can't say the details of it, but he used to work in red team side for U.S. military bases, just generally speaking. And their favorite tactic wasn't exploiting vulnerabilities. It wasn't phishing. It was producing fake credentials, physical credentials, gaining access to a physical OT space. There's a couple different areas in the military that they call it something other than OT, but it doesn't matter. And then they would get access to equipment before it was installed. Imagine the scenario, right? You're a sergeant, you're doing whatever. You've got a project to install new servers, or you've got a project to install, in our case, maybe new PLCs or HMIs or whatever. And, like everybody in life, you're busy. You get the shipment. The shipment literally gets delivered to your desk, which is usually a cubicle if you're working in this type of environment. And it might take you a week to install it, to configure it, you read the manual. Okay, what do I got? How do I do it? Well, during that week, oftentimes that equipment's not stored securely. It's just on your desk. And my buddy's favorite tactic to penetrate these places was to get access to those buildings. And then after the guys go home, get access to those devices, implant malware or some sort of malicious code on it that nobody knew was there because all the guys that installed it thought it was new out of the box. They install it. Now he has full access. He has full root access to everything that's new that's being installed. And because of that visibility gap, because of that security gap, oftentimes that wasn't detected. So I just thought, I sat back and went, that's brilliant and frightening all at the same time.
Yeah. Especially because we're living in times where the national security part of it is actually pretty important. I mean,
Absolutely.
in EU, and that is a scenario in US, but here we have an actual threat, and we have actual intelligence on operative in EU trying to use and understand these roads and how to get there and use it. So it's definitely something that we in the EU, especially in certain part of the EU, are much more aware of now, that this is also a real threat. That's what I'm saying. Like, the chain for an OT company is very, very long. Also because, first of all, it's not just you. That PLC also sits at a storage on a supplier as an integrator for a very, very long time. Maybe it sits there for quite a while. It doesn't go directly to you. It often sits there. Maybe he's doing configurations there before he brings the PLC and then install it and then continues to do configurations afterwards. He has his own PCs. He's going around with the external guy in there doing remote access into your system, but it's also the physical part of the chain of custody of this part of it. So it's both like the physical, like you're saying, the physical, but it's very much also the software. So you sort of have a very dual. It's not just the software you're installing in your server that you wiped, because these PLCs very rarely come being completely right before they bring it into your system and then you're installing, like a server maybe normally would. But these PLCs have legacy system on.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, if we go back and we'll, I'm sure at some point talk about best practices and how to get ahead of all this, but just to set the scene before we get there, I honestly don't remember when it was, but obviously there was the supply chain attack on SolarWinds, which it was either right before COVID or right after COVID. I can't remember. And that particular software, network visibility software, was, I wouldn't say every company had it, but a very large percentage
Very
of
close.
companies
Yes.
had it in some form or another.
Yeah.
And that attack was shocking because of the complexity of it, but more importantly, that the attack was within their supply chain, which then made all of their customers ultimately vulnerable to that attack. And I think after that, I know after that, a lot of my customers, this is previous companies that I worked at, but a lot of my customers got very serious about supply chain management, supply chain security, supply chain risk. And started implementing policies, which again, we'll talk about here in a minute, but started implementing policies to review their potential supply chain exposure. But interestingly enough, in my experience, they all did it on the IT side, but they didn't necessarily do the same level of diligence on the operational technology side, the SCADA side, the ICS side, to their detriment, in my opinion, right? It's still it's still a risk. Let's just call it that. It's a risk because it hasn't been mitigated.
Yeah. And I think my experience working in this space is also, we are just trying to figure out what assets we have out there. Like the thought of understanding, we're just trying to figure out what is out there. The next thought that is going to come somewhere here is, okay, now I know what is out there. I need to know what is coming in, both new hardware and software. And that's the second part of it, because we still talk to customers who's just trying to control what is actually in there and create some sort of understanding of what is coming in. Not alone even having the discussion of saying, okay, I just want to know what coming in, not looking at what is coming in and where did that come from and what was the chain there. Not going out to their PLCs, sub-supplier, and saying, what does the warehouse actually look like? You just installed this PLC in my biggest factory. Closing down cost me $1 or $2 million or euros an hour. What did you where was that piece of hardware before it came into my factory? I mean, we are just trying to get our hands up around our perimeter, not at all having that discussion. And then nowhere near having the discussion of saying what actually comes in. Because what I'm seeing is also the software hardware thing is that, great, now you're maybe virus scanning the software that have come in, but that's just looking for malware. That's not looking for how does software open doors or an
That's
attack
right.
like SolarWinds. SolarWinds wouldn't have been caught if you just virus scanned the damn thing. Not at all. It was an open exploit that they put in there, the system to gain access. So those kinds of things, we are frighteningly nowhere here, Justin, from an OT perspective.
Yeah, and I was recently at a conference where I spoke, and a lot of the conversation was around software bill of materials, hardware bill of materials. How do we get those from our partners or our vendors? And there were some people that were speaking also on the same panel, very advanced. They understood that they had a process and a program in place where they've really done a lot of work. But interestingly, off the record after the conference, I had 3 or 4 different people come to me that had seen me, that had been in that group. So they had seen me speak, and they said, "Oh, hey, good job. Hey, let me ask you a question. Are most of your customers that advanced? Are most of your customers, have they already tracked down hardware bills, H bombs and S bombs?" And the answer is not really. I wish, but that hygiene, a security hygiene on the OT side isn't, not saying it isn't there. It varies by company, and there's a lot of variability, but it's not common on the OT side to be that advanced. And that's, I don't know, it's frustrating. It's worrying, but it's reality, right?
Yeah.
We're not here to lie to people about the
No.
state of the industry. So
No. Well, I mean, at least there is an understanding, and we're trying to ring fence it around and saying, how do we get there? But I do think there is like a way to go, and most customers are not. When I'm also I'm starting to see, first of all, an understanding of ring fencing. I'm starting to see also, as we work in the remote access space, like real supplier management, where they get a signature and here a sign, please sign here that you are doing these things to make sure I'm secure as a manufacturer. I think the next step there is also checking, like doing like you would if you are in software, because some of these are really big companies, like checking, is this then also reviewing these good governance around, okay, what do you actually live up to those? Yes, you maybe briefly on the bigger part that is easy to monitor, but like I said, go again out and discuss, okay, how did you deal with that software package that you just installed? What was the chain of events? What are you doing to protect your PC so it doesn't come into my software that you just installed me? How do you make sure that that does not happen? And I think that conversation needs to happen. It needs to be I understand where I am, like what is coming in and out, like, and I know the bill of material for it. I know who's then remote accessing in. I know that, hopefully you're there already. Otherwise, that's definitely first thing you need to do, because if you don't know who's coming in, installing what, you have no chance of starting this journey. And then the second part is, okay, getting them to sign a supply bill of material, understanding what is allowed or not. But then the other step is reviewing it, because at the end of the day, a contract is great to try to get some money on back, but you need to make sure that they're actually doing this and following up. And it's also sort of in the industry helps us create a better setup.
for sure, and I think you just hit on a lot of the recommended best practices to start this, right? Number one, everybody will say, map your supply chain, right? Figure out where's all this stuff coming from? Where are you vulnerable in the sense of who are you working with? Then you've got to do some sort of risk analysis of, where's the biggest area of concern? And then the next step, and again, not everybody agree with this, but in my opinion, the next step is to conduct your due diligence or do your evaluation of those vendors. But oftentimes, to your point, that evaluation is a questionnaire. Again, not a bad place to start, not knocking it, but asking, hey, do you do this? Okay, that's a start, but that doesn't get you where you need to go, because asking, do you do it, is one thing. Verifying that their answers are correct is the next critical step in that supply chain mapping and in that risk assessment. And so if you're not doing some sort of audit or collecting third-party audit data, penetration data, regulatory compliance audit forms, or checklists that have been performed against that supply chain, against the company in your supply chain, then you're just asking questions you don't necessarily know. Are these answers accurate?
Yeah. And like to your point with SolarWinds, going back to saying it wasn't the supplier. Like if I bought a SolarWind problem, my exploit wasn't SolarWinds, it was SolarWinds supplier. that also contributed to this one. So in terms of like thinking out in the chain, that's yeah, we are a little bit before we get there in OT. Because I think one thing that I'm also starting very much to see is we talk a lot about ransomware and malware as like that is the only way in. But when you think about it, the complexity, a little bit back to the story of the guy that you used to work with, your buddy there, the complexity of attack, we sometimes becomes very sort of, yes, we are dealing with the outer perimeters, the easy part, quote unquote, easy part here of malware and ransomware attack. But what I've also seen is that the sophistication of these attacks, especially on bigger customers, isn't just a ransomware in a packages that you're sending in. That's maybe the first step of an attack. The first step of attack is mapping out your network, understanding sometimes better than what you have on there. And it isn't sending a potentially a malware piece within a software package. Is potentially opening a door, sending compromising the supplier's software update to a PLC that allows for starting to open doors there, or allowing to help sniff around what is actually going around. And that can be the first step before you ever get to there. So it's not just the initial part of it. It's also what is there in that code? What is there in there that hardware? And we are a hardware company too. So we also do a lot of stuff around what do we do with our hardware in transit? How do we make sure that exactly your friend can't do what you talked about there?
Exactly.
So we make sure we can do that, but it's sort of the next step there is understanding that the attack is getting more and more sophisticated.
Yeah, and let me take that one step further. Here, another story. I can't tell all the details because it does relate to something on the military side. But there was a nation-state actor that wanted to impact the operations of a particular base. But rather than actually attacking the base themselves, they were able to compromise the PLCs of a utility provider that serviced the base. So imagine, and I can't say more than that about the details, but imagine if you could turn off power to a base or water to a base or whatever, whatever utility it is.
Yes.
And they did that in a way that was completely unknown to the utility provider. They had no idea that it was done. And those backdoors, those compromises were just sitting there, just waiting to be utilized or exploited in the event that this nation state actor wanted to exploit them. Now that's an extreme scenario, but it's not an unthinkable scenario. We've seen Russia do that in Ukraine with Ukrainian power systems, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
That's maybe 4 years ago, give or take. I don't remember the whole story. I just remember reading about it. That type of attack it's why I'm in this business, right? It's why I care about OT, because this isn't, we should fix this so our website doesn't go down. This is, wait, you can turn power off to a city, or you can turn water off to a city. What does that look like in 5 days, right? What does it look like in 10 days? That becomes a potential mass casualty event very, very quickly. So these threats are real, right? I'm sure this utility provider was not thinking some nation state actor was going to attack them and embed something to exploit their PLCs, but that's what happened.
I think especially in Europe, this is starting to be, and Cyber Resilience Act is coming for a reason in the EU, and especially also because it's like you're saying. I think NIS2 originally was sort of focused on, hey, what is critical infrastructure? But it quickly became also who's delivering to critical infrastructure. Because in a real bad scenario, it's not just about yourself and your own production. It's also about if you don't deliver spare parts. Like we talked to here in Europe around the attack on Jaguar Land Rover. The sort of spiral out implication of that attack is not just that Land Rover is down, but it is also other parts of the supply chain around them where factories are standing still around in Europe that supplies parts to these guys, because they maybe have a factory that is purpose built, or at least some percentage of their supply chain, what they produce, is to this company. So now they're shutting down 25% of the factory, or maybe even in some cases we know the full factory is just standing still for 4 or 5 months. So it in OT, this has a snowballing effect. Like it's a power utility company that shuts down a military base or a production site. And then it snowballs from there, especially if it's production. Then it snowballs from there. And I think that kind of interchanging, that kind of sort of trust chain that needs to be built around the industry, around OT industry, really needs to to get taken seriously. And it's great that the EU is starting to think about it, because it really is a very long chain. It's not just like the supplier to you, it's also where do they get their software from, their utilities from. It's the whole damn chain that has a huge interlocking ability. And if you start pulling out pins of that, it has a huge implications.
Yeah, and a perfect example that I've seen over and over again. Again, you mentioned a lot of our business is in secure remote access. So we see into the OT space. So we see a lot of customers that are trying to figure out, how do I get, not number one, how do I secure that infrastructure? But then also, how can I get trusted resources, access to things that they may need? And we can talk about that. I've got a whole list of things that we would recommend to make that happen. But the one thing that I've been not shocked, nothing shocks me anymore. I guess I'm a little bit jaded, but the one thing that I've been surprised about is you have a ton of very large, let's just say manufacturers, pick whatever industry you want, but you need large people that make stuff, right? And they have a supply chain that requires vendors, the third-party vendors, to maybe do maintenance or services on some of their critical equipment, a production line that makes something, and that critical equipment generally needs some fairly expensive software to be able to be on a laptop, to be able to configure a PLC or something like that. The manufacturer doesn't want to spend $10,000 or $15,000 on the software. Understandable. They're not doing the maintenance. Somebody else is doing the maintenance. So that software lives on a vendor laptop. Okay. So far we're okay. But then oftentimes, maybe just via VPN, the manufacturer lets the vendor access their network, everything on that subnet behind the VPN, with a laptop that they have no visibility into, that they have no they have CVEs or what vulnerabilities are on that laptop, whether there's malicious software on that laptop, because they want to save $10,000 or $15,000. The dollars and cents totally makes sense from an accounting standpoint, but from a risk standpoint, it's introducing. I have a customer that just told me the other day, every minute their a particular production plan is down, it's $60,000 a minute. This is a very, very large company, but you're putting that $60,000 a minute at risk because you don't want to spend $10,000. So that equation of risk management is off.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And off by a bright margin, as you see more and more attacks coming in and seeing more and more problems there. And it's also, again, like you are spiraling out of control at that point. It's not just you, it's the whole economy that is impacted afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some practical stuff. We talked about like what you are very experienced, Justin, from both
you're just saying
military and I'm saying before we start, we talked about the hair. Like
that's
so,
right.
but I'm not saying anything more. I think
I
think it's the tornado's fault. That's why you don't have hair.
The white in the goatee is the tornado's fault.
Yeah, I have two small kids on the playground. I'm already turning both gray and with short hair, so I can't imagine living in Tornado Alley.
Oh, you look great. You have plenty of time to get old.
Yeah, thank you so much. Starting is coming quickly, but let's talk about some practical points of view for the OT security engineers sitting out there. What is your top 10 first steps advice for him?
Yeah. So again, I'm a bit jaded because I've been in this space for a long time. You cannot eliminate risk, right? I mean, you can help you can contain it, you can lower it, but you can't eliminate it. So make the assumption that something's going to go wrong, right? That should always be your assumption. So if something goes wrong, how do you limit the blast radius, right? How do you limit the impact to, instead of like Jaguar, instead of the whole company, how could they have limited it to just a factory? I'd like to go further than that, than say, okay, not a whole factory, maybe just a production line, maybe not a production line, maybe a PLC, right? And so how do you do that? Well, first and foremost, you mentioned it earlier, you've got to map your assets. You have to have an asset inventory of what is on your OT networks that is not a Excel spreadsheet from 7 years ago that was maintained by a guy that retired 3 years ago, which, I mean, that happens in this space. We need an accurate, active asset inventory. First and foremost, you can't protect what you can't see, or you can't protect what you don't know about. I mean, that makes sense. And then when we get into, not to turn this into an IEC 62443 conversation, which is a common OT security compliance standard, it has the concepts of zones and conduits. And I don't want to look it up, Google it, ask Grok or ChatGPT. It'll tell you what that is. But the idea is, how do you segment your network into, call it logical zones, logical areas, to enforce some sort of non-flat network implementation, right? Let's limit what people can get to. That's the whole idea behind that. And then, I mean, in a perfect world, then you would even go further into what is called microsegmentation. So if you think back to, and this is, I talked to a guy at a trade show last week about this. They used to be air gapped. Cool, great. This was a utility company. And then COVID happened and people couldn't travel in the particular state they were in. So they had to find a way to be able to do maintenance without people traveling. So they implemented a VPN. Okay, understandable. You had to do what you had to do. It was an emergency. Well, they're still using that same solution. And they're recognizing now that, okay, it's better than nothing, but it's not the right approach because you're giving access in their design. And I know VPNs can be implemented differently, but they had a couple subnets, and if somebody got access to the VPN, they had access to whatever subnet that they were placed on. So any machine, any device. So not quite fully company-wide, but definitely factory-wide by the way they were designed. They were giving access to everything. That's not an ideal solution. We've got to find a way to get to this idea of segmentation, which I mentioned, like zones and conduits, which is trying to make that less of a flat surface. But then this idea of microsegmentation that says, okay, now I want to wall things off to a device level based on certain protocols, certain ports. Hey, you can only RDP to that device. You can't do anything else to that device. You can just get to it by RDP. But then the next step is the most important part, which is not just the technology on the network side, but then how do I identify the user? So role-based access control. How do I make sure that that user has the right permissions? And how do I get granular to the extent that your permission, we work at the same company, but your permissions might not be the same as my permissions, right? You might have access to a whole factory, but I'm an idiot, so I only have access to this one device, and it's read-only access. That type of security control, security hygiene, I know we don't think about it as a supply chain risk mitigation because we're thinking, oh, it's just cybersecurity, but it absolutely is risk mitigation, because going back to the story I talked about, this one utility that serves the military, their entire infrastructure was compromised rather than a single PLC or a single HMI or a single engineering workstation because of that non-segmented, non-micro segmented infrastructure. I know that was a lot. It's not quite 10 things, but those are the important things in my mind.
But I think why this is really important is back to our first point when we discussed about like how this when you start to open this topic about supply chain security and OT sort of kind of snowballs into just a very, very big thing. It is important that we understand that, we have a lot of work to do, but we have to start with the basics and understanding that we will get compromised. So how do we respond to it? Because the idea of us where most OT company is really starting to secure this chain. Yes, we need to get there, but we aren't there yet. And the reality of it is it's going to take us a while to get there. So you have to start with making sure you understand the implication of how do I limit an attack. So I think it's the exact right way to start having the discussion, because the idea that we are currently able to secure that supply chain and take the necessary steps and really understand is for most companies, for most customers also, like you talked about a few that you talked about with the conference, that they say, hey, are we completely behind? No, you're not. This is where the industry is. So we have to make sure we limit the attack surface. Like what happens when, not if, but when this happens, and trying to stop it happening is not a realistic thing. I think that's very good advice to start with how do I deal with supply chains?
Yeah. And I'll add one more thing to that, because you've implied this. I don't think you said it, but we're never going to catch everything, particularly with 20-year-old equipment in our infrastructure already, right? It didn't go through a risk analysis, cybersecurity risk analysis when we acquired it, right? It's 20 years ago. Nobody had heard of that. Yeah. So how do we mitigate that? And it's probably the last piece that I should have added when you asked me the standards. You've got to have some sort of active monitoring / visibility. And what I mean by that is that can be a monitoring of network traffic to determine anomalies, to determine if malicious users are doing something, or to even see if new devices are added, all the way down to, and you did say this earlier, tracking the visibility of who's connecting to your equipment. Should they be connecting to your equipment? What are they doing when they connected to your equipment? Do you have visibility into those sessions? Because to your point, we can't make up for things that we didn't do in the past, right? That's the reality. There's not enough money for that. And we can't make up for the mistakes we make today, right? We're never going to have perfect supply chain management down to, I know every piece of software that's integrated into this third party's equipment, and I know where they got their code.
Yeah.
So we've got to build a kind of fence around the fact that we know we're not going to be perfect. And that comes into some sort of monitoring, visibility, active alerting. We've got to have that on the OT side. And I make the joke that I was preaching that 15 years ago, and people were like, "Oh, he's funny. That's weird." Then 10 years ago, they're like, okay, maybe he's right. 5 years ago, they're like, "Yeah, we really should do that." And now they're like, "Why haven't we done this already?" So that's kind of been the progression. I pray for the day that we get to the point that everybody looks back and go, "Wait, there was a day we didn't monitor what was happening on the OT side." We're not there yet.
No.
If you're a customer that doesn't have visibility, rest assured, you're not alone. But we got to fill that gap.
We're getting there as an industry. And then maybe the last piece of advice I want to give is to the CISO sitting, maybe listening to this episode, having to deal with this issue is because we started about it is a snowballing issue, and there is a very far away. And at some point you have to, because supply chain security, not just in the cybersecurity, but just in general, their OT CISOs are a part of a bigger supply chain stuff, because you are bound to get asked by the board, how do we deal with if our customer gets this cybersecurity attacked and what? So this is very much a board issue. How do we secure our supply chain, not just cybersecurity wise, but also supplies wise? And as this world unfortunately gets more and more disjointed from each other, this topic is going to skyrocket to the top of the boards, if it isn't already there, head of their joint. How do they secure this? And they're going to come ask for both. They're going to start asking in the IT space, who has our cloud? Where is our cloud? Where is our software coming from? But that conversation is also coming to you guys on the OT side. Where is our PLC coming from? Where's our software coming from? How are we agnostic from risk in a fragmented world where there may be more regions and the same stability isn't there in there? And this issue, and then you also come in as a CISO and you look at your current vendors and take a look at that list and you think, oh my God, there is some work to do here. So I think this is a hot button issue that is coming for you, whether it's through the board actually understanding OT security and the application. Otherwise, it is coming from the IT side, the discussion over there, and is also coming from just your supply chain manager is going to come ask, how do I make sure that my supply chain doesn't fall apart here? And I think it's important to know this issue is coming, but also a little bit you're hinting to is saying, if you could then go to the board and show them the full snowball, of course you need to be honest about it, but you also need to have a realistic conversation about what is the 10 steps that you need to do. And the steps starts in your own factory, your own network segmentation, your own Purdue model, and your own remote access. Understanding that, having that visibility and your access, and know there's more. But if you present it as a we need to secure the whole chain, then the industry as such just isn't ready for you. Just isn't ready. And the board is also going to look at you and say, they're going to like it. Sometimes if you give them too much, they're going to sit back and think, okay, this is enough risk I can get to. And then you're not going to get the budget you need to actually protect the company that you probably really care about. So you have to make sure when you package this as this is the reality of where the industry is, where we are, the world we live in. We need to start dealing with this, but we need to start on our own side. We need to start investing in the right controls over there, the right visibilities, the right monitoring. And then at some point, we need to do what IT is doing, is taking the next steps in. But this isn't it's an issue where you need to start someplace and then work your way, and understand this is also an industry part where we are. And so my advice is, make sure your boss understand what is your implications for your company, but also start presenting it in a way where they do think there is an issue out of this. Because if you do it that you have to do everything all at once, you need to start somewhere and work your way around there and have a clear strategy in front of the board. How am I part of solving this system? So it isn't the board coming asking you, but it's you saying to, hey, this is the world we live in. This is happening this is my chief technology officer saying, as CISO of OT, I also need to say this. come in with a strategy there. So because you get the funding there to make sure you can secure the company that you really care about. So make sure you sort of understand the full picture, present the full picture to the board, but also are clear on what is the steps, because otherwise they're going to say, this is an industry problem, this is my area, and you're going to leave, you're not going to get the budget to secure your company.
Well said. I
yeah.
don't think I can add anything to that. I think that's a great summary
Yes.
of what
Yeah.
you should be focused on. So
Yeah.
good job.
Thank you so much for your time, Justin. I'll see you soon again. And thank you all for listening to Talk OT to me. Have a nice day, everybody. Stay safe.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Talk OT to me.